Afternoon class. This is again another set of module that we are going to learn in this course in agribusiness management systems. Now, last meeting we have discussed on the one very important planning tool or a framework that will allow us to analyze an agribusiness system from the from the perspective of the customers. Now, we have an agribusiness system that really outlines or show us the interrelationships between the uh, sources of the product and the sources of demand, and we kind of propose or discuss here in class a market-driven framework. We call it the value chain analysis. Okay, so a value chain analysis that will allow us to see how a uh, how a product is conceptualized and also are able or is able to serve customer customer needs and specifications, going through the various segments of the chain until it finally reaches the final sale. Today, we will learn on still part of Module 3 on different tools in understanding the agribusiness systems. We call it the introduction to the theory and principles of supply chain analysis. Previously, we have the value chain analysis. Now we have the supply chain analysis. Now, in just a short while, we will differentiate what is the contrasting differences and similarities between a value chain analysis and a supply chain analysis, or a value chain and supply chain. Now, a just as introduction, a, an agribusiness can be viewed as a value chain. It means we can study all activities needed to deliver the product to the desired market where it is valued. That is for value chain analysis. Now, a supply chain analysis uh, emphasize on the interdependent companies or firms working closely together to manage the flow of goods and services along the value chain to realize superior value at the lowest possible cost. Okay, so remember, in supply chain analysis, underscore the word or the phrase flow of goods and services. Okay, flow of physical goods and services in along the value chain to allow us to see or develop superior value at the lowest possible cost. So there are two things in this particular analysis. One, supply chain analysis involves the physical flow of goods, physical flow, and of course, there is what we call as to assess the effectiveness or efficiency of the supply chain. We choose the channel where the goods are flowing, where it will generate the lowest possible cost. Take note, I will emphasize this. Supply chain supply chain involves the flow of goods and services, physical flow, while value chain involves the flow of information, product information from the market up to the producer or to the upstream player. But here, the upstream player responsible in allowing the goods to flow that meets the requirements of the market to flow the flowing of physical goods along the value chain until it reaches the final sale at the lowest possible cost. Okay. Now, karon pa lang, I already told you the clear-cut or counterintuitive differences between the value chain and supply chain. Now, we are talking here about supply chain analysis. It can also be a sequence. A supply chain analysis can also be a sequence, decision making and execution of processes, material, information, and money flows that aims to meet the final customer requirements that take place within and between stages along the continuum from production to final consumption. Okay? Processes and also processes and flows. Okay? So decision making and execution, or these are processes, and then the flows, the material, information, and money flows that take place within and between different stages along the continuum of the production until it reaches the final consumption. So sequence, that's why it is chain. No? So Linders and Ferron, now, Linders and Fair 99 define SCM as a systems approach to managing the entire flow of information, materials, and services, from raw materials to supply materials, suppliers to factories and warehouses until it reaches the end customer. Now, there's also another definition of supply chain management by Christopher, 1998. So it discusses about trying to emphasize, okay, the chain that generates the least cost possible, least cost, the flowing, the management of upstream and downstream relationship of suppliers and customers to deliver superior customer value at the lowest cost. Okay? Magunsa ka ng you deliver superior value but very expensive. It won't be competitive. Deliver the superior value of the product specified by the customer at the lowest cost. That is very competitive. Okay. Now, Monska has this another definition, and therefore we see that uh, supply chain analysis comprises the physical element, strategic partnering of various market-focused responsive organizations involved in transforming, and the information element, no? Transforming and an information element. Okay, so there is what we call as physical element, and also you have information element. Therefore, we see a supply chain analysis as optimizing a synchronized flow of physical products from the production until it reaches the final consumption. Processes for optimizing supply chain profit. Okay, because as the product flows, there is what we call as cost transmission and cost translation until it reaches the final customer. Then we will see how much is the total supply chain cost. Okay? Kung daghan kag mga frictions along the way, naturally, the total supply chain cost once it reaches the customer is very expensive. Therefore, it cannot compete with the customers. So the game here is trying to see the cost efficiency from the production until it reaches the final customer. Okay? Trying to see the cost efficiency, meaning to say you are trying to reduce the final cost up against the potential cost without an efficient intervention along the supply chain. Okay, so that is the supply chain is all about cost efficiency, because cost will actually impact on total supply chain profit. Now, at the tip of at the downstream part of the supply chain, gamay na lang kaayo ang ginansya sa retailer. What will happen? They are not going to participate in that supply chain. Lugi sila. Upstream players are earning so much while the downstream players are not earning so much. No way. They won't participate. It becomes a very chaotic supply chain network. So, the term supply chain is used to describe the management of material information and funds across the entire supply chain. Okay, so that's how the term for supply chain management. So it talks about managing three flows: physical, information, and financial flow. In contemporary business practice, a fourth flow, namely reverse physical goods flow or reverse logistic, is gaining importance. No? Now, the objective of supply chain is to manage the network of organization that are involved through upstream and downstream linkages, okay, from production down to the consumption, who are involved in the chain, and then see if the cost is actually the cost is actually managed until it reaches the customer, where it still becomes very competitive in the market. Okay, so that uh, the participants of the supply chain must see to it that once it reaches the final customer, competitive pa rin ang pricing, because you are a member of the supply chain, and then very inefficient ang system nimo. Pag abot sa tumoy, very expensive, and then the customer will not make a rebuy again of your, or repeat buying of your products. Then all of you within that particular chain will lose in the process. That means to say, it's very important that there is coordination, and that making sure that the final end of the chain must be generating uh, cost efficient price, or cost efficient uh, price. That means to say, the cost is kept at the lowest possible, that will make price and profit very competitive. Okay. Supply chain involves two or more organizations aligned together. It should be noted that the key to a supply chain existence is the presence of the ultimate customer and its value to him. Okay, so the person at the last node of the chain is very important to everybody. Okay, for example, the supply chain for abaca pulp. Okay, the supply chain for abaca pulp stretches across, beginning from the farmers in, for example, in Baybay, or farmers in Mindanao. Then it goes uh, to the what's this, the baling GBEs, say GBEs, or say uh, baling establishment, no, baling establishment, grading and baling establishment, and then they grade, and then bale, and then again you go to the next segment will be the pulp manufacturer, and the last segment will be the handlers, and then it reaches the final customer, who will finally buy the pulp. That means the importer. Okay, and in the importer there is what we call as a hurdle price. If all the cost added together, and then it does not matches with the price, or even it becomes more expensive than the price, then once the final customer rejects your supply, then all of you along the chain will suffer. So in other words, the coordination here is making sure that the final end of the product is still very much competitive in the market. Okay? So ikaw part ka sa chain, di ka magpalabing gasto, di ka magpalabing, really have to make sure that your system is cost efficient. So that di ka magpalabing presyo para di ka tumahal itong tumoy. No? Something like that. So, in figure 23 presents a diagrammatic representation of a supply chain. Okay? This is a supply chain of jackfruit. Okay? You have a farmer here. This is one supply chain. And then you have customers here buying. And then you have also another supply chain. So we see which supply chain, the survivability of each supply chain here. You have here one supply chain and then another supply chain. The farmer here and the trader could be a group of farmers or group of traders supplying a specific, like for example, sub-trader, and it reaches the assembler and the uh, assembler retailer, jackfruit, no? So that means supply chain can trade across each other. It can also be possible. No? It can also be made possible. So that means there is a coordination among players until it reaches the final customer. Otherwise, if the final customer rejects the product coming from the supply chain, all of you will suffer. No? All of you will suffer. So I think it's time to differentiate, or in fact, understand better what is the structural and even conceptual difference between supply chain and value chain. This is coming from Feller and Kellerman in bptrends.com. No? So what is the difference between supply chain and value chain? So we see similarities. Okay. First, we see similarities. The similarities both overlay the same network. Okay, the same network you have from production up to final sale. Both chains provide companies that interact to provide goods and services. You are talking of the same product. If you talk about supply chain, you are talking about a product. If you talk about value chain, you are also talking about the same product. Only that they come in different perspectives. Okay? Now, perspectives of the market, the other one is perspective of the producer. Okay? For the supply. Because supply is supply. You have the value chain is demand chain. When the supply matches the demand, then you have a market. That is just as simple as that, no? Because value is actually a demand specification. Now, once the value is served by the supply, then you have a market, you have a sale, you have a sale or whatever. Both network aims at serving customer needs optimally. Okay, you are catering to the same network or customer. Both networks refer to the same product and the same customer. Okay, kung rice supply chain ang imong gi-tanaw, value chain for rice maurang gyapon na nga the same customer, the same market, the same product. No? They are complementary to each other. Therefore, a viable supply chain must be complemented with an efficient value chain. That they are because they are complementary. Now let's come to differences. Now, supply chain talks about upstream flow of goods from supplier to customer. Remember, upstream flow. Gikan sa taas, gikan sa farmer, daligdig pa ingon ngadto sa market down to the downstream most part of the chain. And the objective is the chain that produces the lowest possible cost will become more competitive. Okay? Supply chain also focuses on upstream to streamline supplier manufacturer processes in order to improve efficiency and reduce waste. So, in other words, supply chain focuses on the upstream, being ability of the upstream players to supply the goods needed by the value chain, or needed by the market at a very efficient or cost efficient system. Now that is supply chain. What about value chain? Value chain talks about flow of value. Remember, flow of goods, supply chain. Flow of value, value chain. Value chain. From customer to supplier. You see, there is a supply chain is flow of goods from supplier to customer. Here, value chain, flow of value from customer to supplier. That means opposing direction. Flow of information or flow of value from customer to the producer, flow of goods from producer to customer. So they are complementary. Now, if you look at value chain, you are looking at the perspective of the market. If you are looking at supply chain, you are looking at the perspective of the producer. Okay. Value chain focuses on downstream and create value in the eyes of the customer. Okay. It focuses on downstream value chain, while supply chain focuses on upstream. It changes in perspective but can be considered complementary. So lain-lain sila perspective. Ang usa perspective sa customer, ang usa perspective sa producer. But they can be considered complementary in nature. Now, how to conduct a supply chain analysis? Okay, how to conduct? Saan man? Nakibaw na ka, saan pag-conduct o supply chain analysis? Okay, supply chain analysis pertains to efficiency in the physical distribution of goods. A typical supply chain analysis generates objectives that are to minimize, if not avoid, unnecessary frictions in the flow of goods. So na mga unnecessary costs na makahitabo, the intention of the supply chain is to avoid them. Dili na pwede ng daghang kaayog mga fixer, something like that, no? Now, there are a series of steps in conducting a supply chain analysis. One is profile and identify. Okay? Profile and identify the possible supply chain the possible supply chains for analysis. This part of the process is highly dependent on a priori knowledge in terms of possible market texture or structure of the product or commodity. So, in the market, makikita nyo daghan nga, daghan nga, kana pang supplier. Okay? So, kada supplier link na with a chain of like buyer until na sila kada supplier yun na, no? Now, you need to say prioritize. If we do supply chain analysis, first is we prioritize that whether this supply chain is supplying a commercial market. That's one. Another is whether this supply chain generates very efficient cost. Okay? Mas barato ba ang ilang supply chain cost? That's one. Another is whether their supply chain also, whether this supply chain is what? Is actually capturing a huge part of the economy in terms of product distribution and product market relation. Okay? So, just like for example in Abaca, there are so many supply chains in the Philippines for Abaca. But you know what? We studied only four supply chains that needs to be seen as a model supply chain. One is the tag fibers or vanilla hemp supply chain for Abaca. Then you have the SPMI. Okay, you have the New Tech Corporation, and you also have the what? The like PSPI supply chain of the commodity. No? So everything. Why did we select only four? Because from these four players, it already constitute 80% of the total fiber supply in the country, in the Philippines. So, priority gid sila. Okay? They already captured that, they already captured like, what's this, huge proportion of the supply. Another thing is, asa dapita mo i-consider. So, there are various regions producing abaca in the Philippines. But you know what? We selected only 3 regions. What are these regions? Region 5, Region 8, and Region 12. Tulura na ka region gipili. Why not Region 9? Why not Region 7? Why not etc.? We only selected 3 regions for supply chain analysis. Why? Because the 3 regions pulled together or taken together already constitutes 85% of the total fiber supply in the country. So, very important your knowledge on the capacity of the player, no? So, because they influence to a large extent the way market behaves. Okay. So you have another is conducting a supply chain. So you have here identifying also the industry champions. So we need to identify who are the industry champions. Now, industry champions, kana bang firm na nagpagalaw sa market? Both the supplier and the customer. Like for example, in the SPMI, SPMI kalang na ay supply chain. Kinsa may supply chain champion? Naturally, ang Chingbi. Okay? Chingbi. Because Chingbi buys all the fiber and deliver directly to SPMI. Okay? So, may malawak na connection ang Chingbi, no? Who are the industry champion? It could be sole traders or assemblers. The final objective at this stage of the SAA or supply chain analysis, so we identify the network of interconnected like suppliers. Okay, identify which one goes to where, something like that. And then another is defining the boundary and selecting the supply chains for analysis. Okay, dato akong ganinang giingon, daghang itong supply chain in the Philippines for abaca fiber. But we concentrate only on 4. Why? Because it already captures 80% of the entire abaca industry in the Philippines. What's the use of studying the others? It won't change the conclusion once we can improve this side of the question. Say, for example, priority or this side of the equation is complete. Now, defining the boundary is also involving products that will be analyzed. Okay, it should start by answering the question which of these identified networks or proportion of these supply chain networks can be considered as logical representative describing the nature, actual nature and characteristic of the structure of the industry. Ngot ang gingon sa inyo nga, from several supply chain for Abaca, we only zeroed in on four. Why? Because kaning four already constitute 80% of the total market for Abaca. Okay. So we have here, a matrix of consideration for item three, matrix of consideration. We have passed this in, we have passed this in, yes, thank you. I was deeply thinking in terms of what happened if uh, really uh, the the final chain that we were studying in uh, in Bicol, I was thinking that why did I include that particular chain, for example, the Alenteco? I only mentioned four. Actually, there were five. No, I was actually there were five supply chains. Alenteco is very important because this major player in Region Five. So I mentioned Newtech, Alenteco, SPMI, PSPI, and Tag Fibers. No, Tag Fibers. So I think I was just thinking about how come I only mentioned four. There were actually five, no? And this five constitutes already 80% of the market or supply chain. Now, the next after like prioritizing, or shall we say, yeah, prioritizing, and after identifying industry champions, we go to supply chain mapping. Okay, supply chain mapping. Now, in supply chain mapping, there are what? There are considerations to take. There are supply chain mapping. There are questions to follow. Okay, in supply chain mapping. Now, these questions we call it the 6K questions for supply chain mapping. This is pioneered or authored by Picard in 2011, which suggests a conceptual guide in doing supply chain mapping. Okay, now there are various questions that we need to comply here. We call it the 6K questions for supply chain analysis used in mapping. The first question is, who are the key customers and what are their product requirements? Okay, you map out. First question, who are the key customers? Okay, who are the key customers and what are their product requirements? Kinsa may mga buyer and what are their product requirements? How do product and information flow and along the chain? How do products and information flow along the chain? Okay, along the supply chain. Nag-flow ba na siya by electronic? Nag-flow ba na siya physically? Or nag-flow ba na siya verbally or word of mouth? Okay? Next key question is, what are the activities and services provided at each step of the supply chain? Farmers, what are the activities in order to produce the product? What are the farming activities? And then until finally, ma-produce nila ang desired product, which is abaca, for example. Okay? And then pass on to the traders. What are the activities along the trader? Ang trader, they will sort out, grade, etc., and bale and send to the GBE. Who are the key players? Okay? Who are the key players? And what are the respective roles? Who are the key players in the chain? Farmer, trader, GBEs, or grading, baling establishment, pulp manufacturer, etc. Depending on the nature of product that is considered for final sale. If it is for cordage, di na kamo agi og pulp manufacturer. Cordage man, PC, kanang rope ba, nga dagko kayo. Because, for example, abaca, that is either for pulp or for cordage. Ang cordage, or it could be for handicraft. Ang cordage is used for mga shipping, pangtay niya sa pier, or very importantly, ang in demand yun sa cordage na sa mga oil drilling platform. Kaya ang abaka ini bangan dito sa mga metal, dili mo slip, dili mo slide. Og nylon man gud ilang ibangan mo slide ra. Pero abaka mo gunit, mao nang preferred ang abaka as accordance sa material. And then, who are the key players? And what are the critical logistic issues? Okay. What are the issues at the farm level? What are the issues at the trader? What are the issues at the processor? What are the issues at the retailer or wholesaler? Something like that. Issues. What are the issues? High cost of transport, sa pananguban, poor technology, high cost of power, and then you have a lot of other things. No assistance from the government, whatever. No? And these are critical logistic issues. Logistic, we mean ang forward movement ba sa product. What are the impediments? Unsa makapugong? Okay? Then what are the external influences along the entire stretch of the supply chain? External, that means to say it could be government policy, it could be whatever, say for example, environmental regulation. External, those that are out of the control of the supplier or the supply chain player. Okay? Policy environment or what have you, weather or something like this are external influences. Okay? What are the critical logistic issues and what are the external influences? Mana, ikaunom nga mga key questions. After answering that, you can really project the configuration of your supply chain. Okay? So, after mapping, and then you have the complete, say for example, configuration of your supply chain, you are now ready to assess, okay, from our experience, the 5 supply chains that we map out, each supply chain, we estimate the supply chain cost. Okay? I will repeat that. After mapping the supply chain, each supply chain, say, for example, that we have evaluated, we also assess the supply chain cost and the supply chain profit so that we will see which particular supply chain is more preferable and competitive in the market. I will show you a complete, itemization of computing the supply chain cost. Entire supply chain niya, dili lang niya ingog usara ka player, A connected to B, A connected to C, B connected to C, etc. Until the final end of the supply chain, and then the total stretch of the supply chain. How much is the total supply chain cost? Because the total supply chain cost minus, or say the total supply chain, say selling price or price minus the total supply chain cost, that will create the total supply chain profit or total supply chain surplus. For example, ang fiber cost at the farmer or at the trader's level is priced at 40 pesos per kilo. Okay? Now, at the end market, ang buying price is actually $1.50. That means to say, mga 80 pesos per kilo. O karon $3 naman ngani, no? So, that means to say, the total supply chain cost from the farmer until it reaches the final, the final end must not be greater than the fiber cost at the end part of the supply chain. So, I will show you next time the itemization of supply chain cost for you to visualize how to compute for supply chain performance or efficiency. Okay? So, it is essentially, we could compute for the efficiency base or effectiveness base of the tools. When you say efficiency base, that means to say cost over price, or shall I say potential cost. I would say actual cost divided by potential cost, we see efficiency, cost efficiency. Okay? Kung gamay ra ka kag actual cost, okay, divided by, say for example, like potential cost, that means to say, kung gamay ra ka, you have a supply chain efficiency very effective because you are improving the cost performance. But then kung ang imong actual cost, no? Actual cost is higher than potential cost, and that is very disastrous because you cannot compete in the market with very unprofitable supply chain cost. Okay? So, effectiveness based tools then is actually your ability to serve the client at the most effective way, in the most effective way. In other words, by the time the product is needed, naara yun ang imong supply. Very effective ka. Although medyo break-even ra ka or something, ganansya lang kagamay, pero very effective ka. Depending na karon sa configuration or texture of the market. Kung market, very particular about cost, you have to be efficient. Okay? If the market is very particular about availability of product, you have to be effective. In other words, when the product is needed, naay mo supply dayon. Bisag ginansya ra kagamay, okay ra. Kaya kung efficiency ang basihan, gamay ra ka ginansya, talo ka sa katong dagko ang ginansya. Okay? Now, supply chain performance. I will also show to you next time a good, say for example, itemization of how to compute for supply chain performance. Various options of analysis by which supply chain can be evaluated. You have efficiency, that is cost-based, and also comparing against profit also. And then we also have flexibility, that means to say volume flexibility and delivery flexibility. Flexibility, we mean, kung maingon sila nga, dagkig volume karon, maka-adjust din ka sa iyong supply. Flexible ka. Kay, mo prefer ng customer nimo nga, kung maingon sila 5 tons, karon, and then sunod adlaw, himo lang 10 tons, maka-increase din ka, you are very flexible. And of course, delivery flexibility is that any time of the month or week, you are able to deliver them and meet the requirements of the market. You are very flexible in delivery requirement. No? So there is also what we call as responsiveness, customer satisfaction, product price or quality. Responsiveness in terms of customer satisfaction, and responsiveness in terms of product quality. Kung na adjustment sa quality, maka-serve din ka. Responsiveness also in terms of delivery volume. Kung yun sila nga, uy, kulang na ito, gani, supply mi ugma, apasi mi og volume, dudugangi pa, then you are able to supply. Then your supply chain is preferred by buyers. I experienced that I would say, very shameful and very disastrous experience. My customer, this is actual, my customer was Metro Gaisano in Cebu. No? And then Metro Gaisano has 36 branches around Metro Cebu area. Can you imagine 36 branches? No? It's very huge requirement. And then our agreement was to supply them with jackfruit. Jackfruit, fresh jackfruit, sweet and fresh jackfruit at 25 tons every 2 weeks. Okay? 25 tons every 2 weeks. So, supplying ito. Yeah, we have agreed a price. Okay? The purchasing manager told me, Tony, you deliver to us, we will make a deal, deliver to us 25 tons every other week. Okay, can you deliver? So I also was very eager. Yes, we can do that because it was season, jackfruit season that time. So okay, pila may istorya, I told the farmers in Maplag and even in Ormo, okay, you supply. There's a sure market. You call this number and it's a sure market. If OB shipping point, that means to say, ang gaisano na mubayad sa pag-ship from Pier of Baybay or Pier in Ormo up to Cebu. Charge ng gaisano. They will buy the products at this price per kilo. Totoo man, 2 weeks or 1 month after, yung tawag og balik ang gaisano sa suko. Grabe itong imong kuan. Di man mo mutuman og sabot. So what's the problem, ma'am? The problem is the farmer or the farmer association delivered to me 30 tons. But only once. Wala na balik. Wala na mo supply utro. How far can the 30 tons serve our customers in Cebu? Remember, 1 ton is only 2 hours. Or not 2 hours. Your 1 ton of jackfruit will only last us for like 1 day in every branch. Imagine, Usa ka adlaw ng one ton halino nila na 36 branches. Ang 30 di wa pa gyud maapod, less than one ton kada branch. So what happens? Disengage in the market arrangement. That is what will happen if our delivery commitment will fail. So the supply chain, I see it as a huge potential for jackfruit, for example, in in the Visayas. There is a demand, but our farmers are unable to supply the gap. No? So with that note, ladies and gentlemen, our class, very able agribusiness practitioners in the future, that leaves us with the last part of this lecture. Okay, so if you have some questions, we can entertain that in the class, and then for now, please review the recording, and of course we will no, you will also I will also give you the PDF file of this particular lecture. No, so uh, we will I will see you during our face-to-face class. Thank you, and God bless you all.